Sweden and Finland are considering joining NATO, and that's a big deal. But to understand why is it a big deal, we first need to understand why they're not in NATO in the first place. And to understand that, we need to go a little bit back into history. Let's start with Finland. Finland used to be a part of Russia until 1917, when it got its independence and it became a sovereign state. But Russia, or Soviet Union back then, never really accepted that. And in 1939, it invaded Finland in what is now known as the Winter War. The Winter War is a fascinating story of how Finland managed to fight back against a much stronger opponent in the middle of an insanely cold winter. But the key takeaway here is that they managed to remain a sovereign country and defend its independence. But there was a price. Finns knew that even though they managed to fight Russia off, they were still much weaker and they couldn't keep doing that forever. And so they gave up about 10% of their territory and signed a treaty in which they essentially promised that they would not align with the United States and the West and NATO, but that they would remain neutral and avoid doing anything that might upset the Soviet Union. This even created the term Finlandization, which is exactly that, a situation when one country gets to keep its independence in exchange for neutrality. And this remained in place even after the end of the Cold War and after the Soviet Union fell apart. Mostly because the Finnish public preferred to stay neutral. And for 30 years, the polls showed that they didn't actually want to join NATO, even though they could. That is, until now. The case with Sweden is slightly different. Sweden has not been at war or in any kind of military conflict for almost 200 years, since 1841. And since then, its main principle of its survival strategy and its foreign policy has been neutrality. It remained neutral through both world wars and through the Cold War, and it has positioned itself as sort of a humanitarian superpower, a country that's using its resources to resolve conflicts rather than to fight them, which sounds nice in theory, but it can sometimes clash with reality when someone comes knocking on your door. But just like in Finland, the public supported it, and it wanted Sweden to remain this way. Not only it made Sweden safe for almost 200 years, but it also allowed the country to keep a sort of a moral high ground. That's why Sweden has often acted as a mediator in many conflicts around the world. But in both cases, this has changed on February 24th this year, when Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, for the first time in history, the majority of the public in both countries support joining NATO, and it's possible that one of them or both of the countries can do it, even as soon as a few months from now. This did not come out of the blue. Since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, there was a growing concern in both countries about how safe their neutrality actually is, especially since Russian military jets have been repeatedly violating the airspace of both countries. And in 2014, a Russian submarine actually went all the way into Stockholm, the Swedish capital, and then left before the Swedish military even noticed it was there. But it was only the invasion of Ukraine that was the real game changer. And while Sweden is still kind of hesitating, Finland now seems to be fully on board with the idea to join. And obviously, Russia doesn't like that. I mean, one of the key motivations for Russia to invade Ukraine was to stop it from joining NATO. And by doing it, it actually motivated two other countries to do the same thing. Which does make one wonder whether Vladimir Putin is really the brilliant strategist that the media often make him out to be. But the more important question now is, what is Russia going to do if these two countries actually do decide to join? Previously, Vladimir Putin, the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, and other Russian representatives have all been stating that if Sweden or Finland would ever do that, they would face horrible consequences, including military ones. And they are repeating the same claims now as well. But it's hard to say what exactly these consequences would be, and whether Russia would actually go through with carrying them out. Personally, I don't think that anyone believes that Russia would actually attack Sweden or Finland, especially not when it's already struggling in Ukraine. And also not because even though Sweden and Finland are not in NATO, if they were attacked, other European countries would probably come to their defense anyway. And so, more likely than not, these are just empty Russian threats, and Russia will stick to non-military types of response. But we have been also wrong at guessing what Putin might do many times before, and it's good to keep in mind that we can always be wrong again.